Well, I shan't speak for very long at all because we have three fantastic panellists, and amongst you are some of the leading men and women of Melbourne as well, particularly with expertise in optimism and leadership. The genesis of this was, like many of you, I was pestering Ahmed for an inspiring quote on optimism. And he said, how about we do a panel? And why don't we call it the curious case for optimism? Now, why the curious case? Because, of course, you watch the news or read the newspapers or follow social media, so much of it is negative and pessimistic and has changed the face of Australia. Over the last 20 years, Australians have gone from optimistic about themselves, optimistic about their business, optimistic about the country, optimistic about the world. Today, we're still optimistic for ourselves. We're in small business, we're optimistic for that small business. But generally, people working in large organisations are pessimistic about the organisation and its leadership. The country is now pessimistic about the future of the country. We're pessimistic about the future of the world. And most concerning, pessimistic about the future of work. So why have I become passionate in this space? As you know, I was commissioner to the Americas during the GFC. And what was extraordinary was people were still eating and drinking. And they were still loving Australian food and Australian wine. They were still making investment plans for the Pacific region, still looking at Australia as headquarters or centre. And the lovely thing for me, with an Australian accent, which I broadened out a lot while I was there, was the moment you rang and you said you were talking about the Australian story, the door opened. The chairman of Caterpillar said, you Aussies remind the Americans of 100 years ago, nothing is impossible. And that was the welcome. You got everywhere from Chile right through to the top of Canada. Then I had that extraordinary opportunity in the G20. And at that super elite level of central bank governors, of finance ministers, of prime ministers and presidents, it was the same trust in Australians. But I returned to Australia in 2015, and I know I had probably changed a little myself from living in California. But the country had changed, and this extraordinary negativity around leadership confused me. So we established the Australian Leadership Project, and many of you in the room contributed to that with ideas on what makes an Australian leader. If I can summarise the findings, good Australian leaders, as exemplified by this panel, are egalitarian. We talk to the cleaner more politely than we normally talk to the chairman. Self-effacing humour, we take our work seriously, but we laugh at ourselves, and no bullshit, plain speaking. I had the Russian finance minister say to me, Victor, I never die wondering what you'll think. And that is a good thing. And if we pick that, I reckon we're probably running at 100% of people in this room who have those three qualities. We could walk down St Kilda Road and probably still be running at 50 or 60% at random. The reality is there are millions of good leaders in Australia, whether they're running kindergartens, medical centres, hospitals, regulatory agencies, water companies, Deloitte Centre for the Edge, communications companies and the like. And that's justified when you see that we're number one on the United Nations Development Index, number one on the OECD Good Life Index, 5 of our cities in the top 15 on the Economist ranking of cities. And I can go on with those statistics. So I was still bewildered as to the negativity of Australians towards leadership. And my revelation came at the 2017 Global Integrity Summit, where on that board I am the Pollyanna. And they gave me the opportunity to run the last panel, which was called The Case for Optimism. And after 3 days of misery, speeches that emphasised the negative, this session just made the room sparkle. And without going too deeply since then, my research and work since then has now focused on asking people one question, which is what makes you optimistic? And I've asked it of women digging ditches in India in their saris. I've asked it of presidents and prime ministers because I believe that the times call for realistic and infectiously optimistic leadership. And you can't do that by being a Pollyanna. You can't do it by telling other people what should make them optimistic. They need to find it within themselves. So today we have 3 magnificent panellists. We're not going to make speeches. We're going to do it by question and answer, and Cheryl's going to go first. So Cheryl, in this book, Optimism, the How and Why, I quote you as saying, "The case for optimism centres around the human condition and the unconscious bias towards optimism of us humans. We have a driving need to make a difference to our bit of the world, to leave the world in a better place." And I think one of the things you want to tell people about is in your work at the CRC for water-sensitive cities, the RISE project, where you and the Asian Development Bank are making a difference to the lives of people. So, Cheryl, the audience is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to this session, The Curious Case for Optimism. And I am a very optimistic leader, but if I talk about, I could talk, it would seem for EPA, why would I be optimistic? And I could talk about that, but I'm going to pick this project, RISE. So I'm part of Monash Sustainable Development Institute. I'm on their advisory council. And RISE is an extraordinary project. Funded, as Victor said, by the Asian Development Bank and also by the Wellcome Trust. And it was born out of research that my organisation and its predecessors, that's the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities, have done for decades. And that research is around how do we make, obviously, cities more water sensitive, but what is the green infrastructure that we can produce that actually cleans water? And so that, when I think about green infrastructure, think about reed beds, but they're engineered. This comes out of decades of engineering research at Monash. It also comes out of social research, and that's how this project got started. So the thesis behind this is that RISE, by the way, stands for Revitalising Informal Settlements Environments, RISE, R-I-S-E. Informal settlements is DFAT's gentrified word for slums. And so when I'm talking about, I prefer to use the word slums because I think it brings an image for all of us and we know what we mean. So the thesis is that children who live in these environments have basically continual diarrhoea. They're shorter than their peers in other countries, and they're continually infected by E. coli. They're walking through often floodwaters or creeks and waterways where if they have a toilet, and sometimes toilets have been provided, but those toilets discharge into the environment, not through a treatment system. So the thesis is can we reduce the incidence of diarrhoea in these settlements through some very basic infrastructure? The Wellcome Trust, which is a major pharmaceutical trust in the United Kingdom, is funding the research, and the Asia Development Bank is funding the on-ground works. It takes place in 2 countries, in Fiji, in Suva, and Indonesia in Makassar. 24 settlements altogether. And it's a 5-year program, and we're just seeing the beginning of it, but what we're doing is actually putting a walkway. So the settlement's not being bulldozed. There's incredibly cohesive village family groups in these settlements. Some of them, interestingly, are women only. They're women who've come out of in both Suva and in Indonesia. And we're putting a walkway through with green infrastructure to clean up effectively a very small septic tank system which does the primary treatment, and a shared toilet and wash basin between a number of huts. And huts is a nice description for these. And because of the 5-year project, we did not expect to see outcomes for that period. That's what a research project is. It's a genuine research project. But we've just opened, just cut the ribbon on our first demonstration project in Makassar. And the community, what we did, because this is about social research as well, the community designed how this would work, where the walkway would go, where the infrastructure would go, where the toilets would go. And that was a project that was led by Monash and the social scientists at Monash. And we opened this, and what I didn't realise is the impact of actually having somewhere to walk between the huts that is dry. And so a woman was in tears talking about the fact that she used to have to pay someone to cross on a bamboo raft in winter to actually, or in the wet season, to get her across the other side to bring her groceries. And she could now walk. And I realised that the impact of this project is far greater than just the social impacts of this project are far greater than perhaps anything else at all. So I'm incredibly optimistic. This is research. It's a genuine research project. We don't know what the outcomes will be. It has implications for Australia and Australian communities as well. But when I see the joy of this community, they've painted all of their walkway, the ceremonies that they had, it makes me optimistic thinking about the years of research that went into this stage of getting this project ready.
Absolutely brilliant. And if you watch the video, I published a video on my social media, but if you have a look at this and just look at the change in this community and this woman in tears, just in gratitude. And what Cheryl's done is to take, the 60 years that we've been working in this space in Australia and transport it to people. So I find it amazing. Now, Donna, again in the book, you say conscious, deliberate optimism, particularly in the face of what might feel like overwhelming adversity, is crucial to success. And part of your job in sewage and recycling and the like is bringing innovation to bear in a country that is almost panic-stricken by water shortages. So tell us what you mean and how you apply optimism in the pursuit of innovation.
So what do I mean by that? Sometimes when we face into challenges, it can feel overwhelming. Sometimes there are no easy answers, there are no easy pathways, and particularly in those situations, I firmly believe looking for the understanding that success is possible, that there are opportunities buried within the challenges we face, is absolutely critical to success. I'd like to mention the ozone layer. So we haven't talked about the ozone layer in a very long time, but I remember all the conversations we used to have about the ozone layer and how challenging and how dire that used to feel, right? So right now, the ozone layer is repairing itself, and it has been repairing itself for the last 19 years. And by 2060-ish, it will be fully repaired, right? Now, when we were having that conversation as a society, it felt incredibly challenging, incredibly difficult, and there were a whole heap of actions that we put in place. Some worked, some didn't, some had impacts, we dealt with the impacts. But the ultimate place that we've ended up in is that we put actions in place, we addressed the challenges we had, and we've got results. Now, one of the challenges that we're facing at the moment around climate change can feel just as challenging and dire. It does feel like we are facing, all our conversations are about the challenge, and our context is all about what's incredibly difficult. The same mentality is required. There are solutions out there. There are solutions that we can tap into, but not if we believe failure is the only possibility. We have to believe that success is a possibility. We have to be able to envision that success, look at where we are right now, and then put actions in place to get us there.
And you're the president of the Institute of Water Administration, and you're changing the narrative there, particularly with your young leaders, and you even themed your last conference as optimism. How are you finding that? How's the change in narrative from pessimism and problem solving to opportunity and optimism?
Well, it's energising, right? So deliberate pessimism convinces us that not only is failure a possibility, it's inevitable. and success is not, right? So when you start talking about optimism, you start talking about opportunities, and you start having conversations around not just the theoretical, but solutions that other people have come up with. When you start bringing people to the table to have, whether it's panels or presentations or conferences, when you start bringing people to the table who don't just talk about the challenge, but talk about the challenge and what they've done, it energises people and it changes what they think. And the great thing about ideas is that if I have an idea and you have an idea and we share the idea, we don't just have two ideas. Ideas spur more ideas. They spur improved ideas. They spur random tangents that take you in different directions. So having those conversations to me is energising, but it's also spurring ideas.
So one of the successes you've had is the Yarra Valley Waste to Energy plant, which I think will make you the only water utility carbon neutral by 2023. You're spawning imitators. So just tell us a little bit about how a water company goes to taking food waste to create energy and going carbon neutral 7 years ahead of schedule.
So the waste to energy plant that Yarra Valley Water has built is the first of its kind in Victoria, and it takes organic waste from various suppliers, as Victoria Market for instance, and then turns it into energy that not only offsets our energy use, but then we sell back to the grid as well. We are aiming to be 100% renewable, and this takes us along that path. But when that conversation first started, quite a number of years ago, and the possibility of moving into this space, there was a lot of apprehension, right? Oh, is this our core business? Well, waste is our core business. We manage a lot of waste, a lot of sewage treatment plants. That is our core business, a lot of poo. So yes, waste is our business. Do we have the commercial acumen? Well, get the commercial acumen, get the know-how. So having the optimism of being able to not pretend that there aren't challenges, but that there was something incredible that could be achieved, had to be a part of the thinking. Now, I was talking earlier about ideas spawning more ideas. Fabulous that other organisations are looking at waste to energy plants, looking at how they can stand them up so the business case does stack up, because that's where we need to be. We are, the water industry is all, they're all public sector organisations. We're focused on creating, serving up, we literally exist for our customers and our communities. So the more they get on board with that and make it stack up, the better for all of us.
Now, Erwin, I have quoted you all around the world. Your slide appeared in Phoenix last week and San Francisco, and you said this to me: be an optimist and be relentless in pursuing the beacon of hope, so that you are always moving towards the light that will guide you, shine on you, and keep the shadows of darkness and despair behind you. Now, I reckon the medical researchers followed you.
Yes.
Harvard, Boston University, the American military, Sinai medical system have all been reporting in the last few weeks as a doctor.
Yeah.
Tell us what's the medical message on optimism.
Sure. I think the first thing to say is that there's the recurrent theme of optimism not just being a wishy-washy feeling of happiness and blind faith that things are just going to be okay, and not looking at the downsides, but it's a conscious decision, it's a deliberate, and it has to be relentless. And it's about it's about hope, because that's a key thing, is to actually have a vision of a destination that is better than where you are now, and then pursuing that relentlessly, not forgetting that, there, as the quote says, there is despair, there are potential downsides, but you are actually working very hard towards the destination. Now, in terms of optimism itself, there's a lot of research around this, right? And the research around optimism crosses over with the research around positive culture, positive mindsets, and overlaps with happiness, overlaps with mindfulness. I mean, there's a lot of kind of themes that people are looking into now. And the reason being that people are starting to discover that there is hard science behind this. This is not just about, again, emotional discussions and feelings that really changes with the circumstances. But optimism is about really looking at joy, true joy. People talk about the difference between joy and happiness. Happiness is very circumstantial, situational. You're happy one day, sad the next. But true joy is being joyful within yourself, no matter how the circumstances are. And so if you look at the research, there are I mean, when I look at it, when I was looking at it, there were two definitions of optimism. There is dispositional optimism, which is the disposition of your temperament. Some people are born leaning towards glass half full as opposed to glass half empty, so that's dispositional. But then there's also a thing called explanatory style. So some people will consciously explain things that happen to them in a positive frame. So when things potentially go wrong, they go, "Whoa, this is a chance for me to do better," as opposed to "my life's over." You know what I mean? So it's how you're gonna frame it, how you internalize versus externalize issues, and how you take control of what you have control over and what you don't have control over, you don't sweat it. So I think the research now, the evidence base is quite large. You know, starting from the 1960s when they started looking at optimism, looking at finding that optimism actually has health outcomes both for your mental health, which is obvious, because I think if you're optimistic, you kind of keep the sort of negative feelings at bay, but then also your physical health. So you were referring to kind of like the big study that was published in the newspapers a few weeks ago out of Harvard and Boston University. So they did this study of over 30 years, an epidemiological study, 70,000 plus people, and they found that optimistic people had a longer lifespan and had lower mortality by up to 11% to 15%, right? And in fact, optimistic people were overrepresented in people who were at the higher end of longevity. So people who are above 85 tend to be more optimistic. So that was a big study, and it was very good. And then at the same time, actually, so that was by the Lee group. Then there was another group out of Mount Sinai. You referred to this. This is a meta-analysis. Looked at. So meta-analysis is where you look at all the studies that have been done. You make sure that they're robust, and you merge them. So this meta-analysis is like 15 studies which included 200 over 1,000 people, right? So lots of people, and they found that people who were optimistic had a lower risk of cardiovascular disease and lower mortality by 35%. So, and again, this is a big study, and this is hard science. So it's without doubt that, you know, by being optimistic, somehow, not only is in your mind, it filters down into your physical health, into your body. And we all know about the mind-body axis, and you know what we all know about that. And I think, you know, I can quote many studies, but I think the theme is that, you know, if you're optimistic in today's society, you have a higher chance of living longer, having less cardiac disease, having less depression. There are a lot of studies, and you referred to the fact that society today is trending towards pessimism, and there's no wonder because of the existential crisis that we're facing in terms of climate change, as in the media. And the media itself there was a huge study that just a few months ago that showed that there is a high proportion of negative stories in the media because negative stories sell. If you have positive stories, people don't read them, people don't buy papers. So automatically the media is geared towards pessimism. And there's a lot of studies that show now that the higher proportion of people who are on social media, who use technology, the more depressed you are. So this study is put across kids and teenagers, young adults, and multiple studies now, you know, that show if you go off Facebook, for example, there was a nice study that showed if you go off Facebook, it's a control study, go off Facebook for a few months, you actually have less depression, you actually feel better, you know. It's just, so it's a fascinating area, and I think as people in the room, as leaders, I think what we need to do is, you know, not only think about optimism as something for ourselves and for our own mental health, but something that we can lead for society. I think, you know, without a vision, you know, people, you know, the Bible says people perish, right? But without a vision, people kind of become lost, and they don't see hope. And so my call is really about having a beacon of hope that you as a leader can show, and show people that, you know, out of the situation that we have, actually there is a potential way out. And if you come with me, we can go there together. And we can do it in a way that's joyful, in a way where we can, you know, you can do it in a way that, you know, you can take, in any journey, we all know, you can do it sad and you can do it happy. You must do it in a joyful way, enjoy the journey, you know, and have hope that you're going to achieve it, right? Because, you know, what more can you do, right? Because that, what you have in control is your actions, and so make your actions matter.
And in fact, the evidence is that optimism is 25% genetic and conditioning, 75% of decisions you make. So, you've been Chief Medical Officer at Monash. You're Chief Medical Officer at St Vincent's.
Yeah.
And we hear so much whinging and whining about the health system. How do you, in a very practical way, be that optimist, that beacon of hope in these big health systems?
Sure, and so I have the great honor and opportunity to work with great leaders like my CEO, Toby Hall, who, you know, in the face of adversity, which we've talked about, where, as you say, you know, health is becoming more complex. There's an aging population, chronic disease is rising. There are a finite amount of resources that we have. We're not building any more new hospitals or hospital beds. So you kind of need to think about how do we manage that? Now, you can sit there and think it is impossible. The system's going to crash. But you know what? We are the system. The people that work in it have not only the accountability and responsibility, but the opportunity and the privilege to actually be able to change it. So, you know, that's how Toby frames it, and it's how I look at it, is that, yes, there is this kind of tsunami of unwell people who are about to come. How do we design a system to look after them? Because we will be them. You know, all of us in this room will be like them. So it's incumbent on us to think about it and to have hope that the system will not only cope, but will actually be better than what it is today. Because the system, although we know that in Australia, our health system actually leads the way. I mean, we are the enemy of a lot of jurisdictions around the world, but it can still be better. I mean, there are gaps that we all know this. And so how do we actually make it better for ourselves and for our future generations? How do we actually future-proof this? And you can only do this through a lens of optimism. Now, there is this whole, you can debate, you know, optimism versus realism versus pragmatism, right? Because people talk about it. You know, how can you just be optimistic? You need to be realistic. And the realistic thing is this, you know. And there's a lot of studies around this whole mindset thing. So, for example, we know that lawyers, I got a few lawyers in the room, have a higher level of depression, higher level of suicide. And there are many reasons for this, but one of the reasons for this, and there was a psychiatrist in America who specializes in treating lawyers. And she published a paper a few years ago now that showed that the best lawyers are the ones who actually are pessimistic. Because if you're a pessimistic lawyer, you're going to look at the worst case scenario for your client, you're going to look at all the holes, and you're going to tell the client, this is the worst thing that can happen to you, this is what you have to do to fix it. And that's what people want. I mean, you know, I don't want a lawyer to tell me everything's fine. I want a lawyer to pick all the holes for me and to tell me the worst case scenario so that I can. The problem with that is that all you do is bad news every day. Of course you're going to get depressed. So I'm not suggesting, so for that reason, I'm not suggesting that optimism is about turning a blind eye to the potential downsides of things. You need to look at all those things. You need to actually be able to understand the good things and the bad things. The world is, have problems. I mean, you know, there are issues to do with climate change, but we need to still have hope, not only for ourselves, but for our kids, that we can endeavor and try our best to fix this for them. You know, otherwise, what's the point, right? We can't, and this is this is tension. We can't then have so much hope that we pretend things are not gonna, you know, everything's gonna be all right, mate. You know, we just, as you say, keep partying and keep eating and drinking. We have to be relentless in pursuing the hope. This is why, you know, people like Cheryl and Dona, they don't just talk about optimism and hope and use words. You have to back it with action. So optimism is about deliberate action. It's about actually walking the talk and not just talking the talk. So,